Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Before we start tonight's video, I need to ask you something. Have you ever driven through a really small town? The kind where there's just one diner, one gas station, maybe 500 people living there? Everything looks peaceful, right? Everyone's friendly. Everyone waves at strangers. Well, tonight I'm going to show you why that peace is sometimes just a cover for something much, much darker. We're heading to Oregon. 7 different small towns. 7 true horror stories that will make your blood run cold. And I'm not talking about ghost stories here. I'm talking about a waitress who discovered her entire town was being slowly poisoned. And when she tried to tell people, they threatened her family. I'm talking about creatures in the mountains that hunt humans for sport. Things that shouldn't exist but do. These stories come from police reports, hospital records, people who barely survived to tell what happened. If you're new to Mr. Midnight, hit subscribe right now because I bring you the scariest true stories every single day. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a single one. Trust me, after tonight, you're going to think twice before stopping in any small town. So turn off the lights, lock your door, and let's begin. Because what you're about to hear really happened. My name is Lisa Martinez, and I've been a server at Mountain View Diner here in Bend, Oregon for 3 years now. It's not glamorous work, but I know every regular customer by name and their usual order. I can spot a bad tipper from across the room and handle the breakfast rush without breaking a sweat. I've served coffee to construction workers before dawn, comfort food to families after funerals, and late-night pie to teenagers after prom. I thought I'd seen everything this small town had to offer. But what happened during the summer of 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about the water we drink every single day. It started with something as simple as a cup of coffee, and it ended with me standing in federal court, testifying against people who poisoned an entire city. Sometimes I wonder if I could have acted sooner. Sometimes I wonder how many people would still be alive if I had. This is my story. Mountain View Diner sits right on 3rd Street, with big windows facing the Cascade Mountains. We've got 24 booths with red vinyl seats that are cracked but comfortable, and a counter with 12 stools where the regulars like to sit. The coffee maker is older than me, but it makes the best coffee in town. At least, it used to. My boyfriend Jake works at the water treatment plant on the east side of town. He's been there for 5 years, ever since he graduated from community college with his water systems certification. He's proud of his job, always talking about how they keep the water clean and safe for all 85,000 people in Bend. The plant processes water from the Deschutes River, running it through filters and adding chemicals to kill bacteria. Jake knows every pipe and valve in that place. I work the morning shift, starting at 5 a.m. when the construction crews come in for coffee and breakfast. The diner smells like bacon grease and coffee, mixed with the pine scent that drifts in from the mountains. Our old cash register makes this satisfying ding when you hit the keys, and the grill hisses when Mary, our cook, drops eggs onto the hot surface. Everything has a rhythm here. Coffee pots brewing every 20 minutes, the bell above the door chiming when customers come and go, the soft scrape of forks against plates. It was the first week of June when Mrs. Henderson, one of our regulars, pushed her coffee cup away with a disgusted look. "Lisa, honey, what did you do to the coffee today?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "It tastes like chemicals." I poured myself a small cup and took a sip. It tasted fine to me, maybe a little metallic, but nothing terrible. "I'll make a fresh pot," I told her, thinking maybe the pot had been sitting too long. But the fresh pot didn't help. Mrs. Henderson still complained, and so did Mr. Petrov, who'd been coming in for breakfast every Tuesday for 10 years. Then Mrs. Chen said her tea tasted off and asked if we'd changed brands. I didn't think much of it at first. People complain about coffee all the time. Too strong, too weak, too hot, too cold. But over the next few days, more customers mentioned the taste. They described it as metallic, chemical, or just wrong somehow. I started paying attention to which customers complained. It wasn't the young construction workers or the teenagers. It was mostly older folks, the ones who'd been drinking our coffee for years and knew exactly how it should taste. By Friday, 3 of our elderly customers had called in sick with stomach problems. Mrs. Henderson's daughter called to say her mother had been throwing up all night after drinking coffee at our place. Mr. Petrov came in looking pale and shaky, holding his stomach. Mrs. Chen didn't come in at all, which was unusual because she never missed her Tuesday and Friday breakfast. I mentioned it to Jake that evening while we watched TV in his apartment. Maybe there's something wrong with the water, I said. A bunch of customers think it tastes weird. Jake barely looked up from his phone. The water's fine, Lisa. We test it every day. It meets all the EPA standards. Maybe your coffee machine needs cleaning. I knew our coffee machine was clean. I cleaned it myself every morning. But Jake worked at the water plant, so I figured he would know. Still, something felt wrong. The following Monday, I got a call that made my stomach drop. My grandmother had been taken to the emergency room over the weekend. She'd been having terrible headaches and seemed confused, not recognizing my grandfather at times. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. She was only 72 and had been healthy her whole life. I visited her at the hospital during my break. She looked so small in that big hospital bed, staring at the ceiling with unfocused eyes. When I held her hand, she looked at me like she was trying to remember who I was. The water tastes funny, she whispered. At home, it tastes like metal. That Tuesday, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Mary, our cook, mentioned that her friend who works at Pilot Butte Elementary School said kids were getting sick. Not just a few kids, dozens of them. They were breaking out in strange rashes and throwing up during lunch. The school nurse was overwhelmed. I couldn't stop thinking about what my grandmother had said about the water tasting like metal. That night, I went online and started researching water contamination. What I found terrified me. Chemical poisoning could cause exactly the symptoms I was seeing. Stomach problems in older people, confusion, headaches, skin rashes in children. The elderly and young were most vulnerable because their bodies couldn't process toxins as well. I bought water testing kits from the hardware store the next day. They were simple test strips that could detect common contaminants. I tested the water at the diner and at my apartment. Both samples showed traces of chemicals that shouldn't be in drinking water, compounds I couldn't even pronounce. My hands were shaking when I called Jake. I tested the water. I told him, there are chemicals in it that aren't supposed to be there. There was a long silence. Lisa, those home test kits aren't accurate. You don't know what you're looking at. Then, explain it to me, I said. Come over and look at these results. When Jake arrived at my apartment, his face was pale and he couldn't meet my eyes. I showed him the test strips, the color charts, the readings that clearly showed contamination. He stared at them for a long time without speaking. Jake, what's going on? I asked. He sat down heavily on my couch and put his head in his hands. There have been some technical issues at the plant, he said quietly, but my supervisor said it's under control. What kind of technical issues? The filtration system has been acting up. Sometimes the chemical levels get a little high, but we're still within acceptable ranges. I could tell he was lying. Jake, look at me. What's really happening? He finally met my eyes, and I saw fear there. Promise me, you won't tell anyone. I could lose my job. Tell me what? My supervisor, Mr. Brennan, he's been taking money from a chemical disposal company. They've been bringing trucks to the plant at night, adding stuff to the water supply. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Adding what? Industrial waste, chemicals for manufacturing plants, stuff that's supposed to go to hazardous waste facilities, but it costs the companies too much money. So they pay Brennan to dump it in our water supply instead. I stared at him, not believing what I was hearing. For how long? 3 months, he whispered. Maybe longer. 3 months. 85,000 people in Bend had been drinking poisoned water for 3 months. My grandmother, Mrs. Henderson, those kids at school, they'd all been slowly poisoned by chemicals that someone dumped in our water for money. We have to report this, I said. No. Jake grabbed my arm. Brennan said anyone who talks will be fired and charged as an accomplice. I could go to prison, Lisa. And he has connections. People won't believe us. But I was already thinking about my grandmother lying in that hospital bed, about the children with rashes, about all the elderly customers who'd stopped coming to the diner because they felt sick. This wasn't just about Jake's job anymore. I told Jake I wouldn't say anything, but I was lying. I started documenting everything. I took photos of sick customers, collected water samples from different parts of town, wrote down dates and symptoms. I visited other nursing homes and found the same pattern: elderly residents developing sudden confusion, memory problems, and physical illness. The most heartbreaking was when I visited my grandmother again. She didn't recognize me at all this time. The doctor said she was showing signs of rapid onset dementia, but they couldn't explain why it was happening so fast. I knew why. The chemicals in the water were destroying her brain. I tried calling the EPA, but every time I started to explain the situation, I got transferred to different departments or put on hold until I gave up. Then one day, Mr. Brennan showed up at the diner. He was a big man with gray hair and cold eyes. He ordered coffee and sat at the counter, making small talk about the weather. But when the diner emptied out, he leaned closer to me. "I hear you've been asking questions about our water quality," he said quietly. "That's not smart, Lisa. Accidents can happen to people who stick their noses where they don't belong. Your grandmother's already in the hospital, would hate for anything to happen to your parents too." I felt ice in my veins. This man was threatening my family to cover up the fact that he'd been poisoning an entire city. But I also realized something else. He was scared. If he was taking the risk to threaten me personally, it meant I was getting close to exposing him. That weekend, I drove to Portland and found an environmental lawyer named David Chen. I brought all my documentation, water samples, and photos. He tested the water samples at an independent lab and called me 2 days later. "Lisa, these results are horrifying," he said. "Your water contains industrial solvents, heavy metals, and carcinogenic compounds that were banned decades ago. This isn't just contamination, this is systematic poisoning." Within a week, federal agents raided the water treatment plant. They found records of payments from 3 different chemical companies, trucks entering the facility at night, and falsified water quality reports. Brennan was arrested, along with executives from the companies that had been paying him. The independent testing revealed that Ben's water supply contained some of the most dangerous chemicals ever used in manufacturing. The contamination was so severe that the entire water system had to be shut down. Trucks brought in clean water while the pipes were replaced and the treatment plant was rebuilt. Blood tests showed that over 40,000 residents had significant levels of these chemicals in their systems. Children were developing learning disabilities. Adults were showing early signs of dementia and liver damage. The cancer rate in Bend started climbing immediately. My grandmother died 3 weeks after the plant was shut down. The doctors said the brain damage was irreversible. She never recognized me again after that day in the hospital when she told me the water tasted like metal. I testified in federal court against Brennan and the chemical companies. Their lawyers tried to make me look stupid, calling me an uneducated waitress seeking attention. But my documentation was solid, and the jury could see that I was telling the truth. Brennan got life in prison for mass poisoning and manslaughter. The chemical companies paid over $3 billion in damages, though they never admitted wrongdoing. Jake testified against his supervisor and got immunity, but he had to find a new job in another state. The aftermath was devastating. Cancer rates in Bend increased by 300% over the next decade. Hundreds of children developed permanent learning disabilities. Dozens of elderly residents died from brain damage before the contamination was discovered. Families were destroyed by medical bills and lost loved ones. I couldn't go back to serving coffee after that. Every time I filled a cup, I thought about poison. I became an advocate for water safety instead, traveling around the country to speak about what happened in Bend. New federal laws now require real-time monitoring of all water supplies, partly because of what I documented. I still live with the guilt that I could have spoken up sooner. Maybe if I'd acted faster when the first customers complained, my grandmother would still be alive. Maybe those children wouldn't have permanent brain damage. But I also know that without the evidence I gathered, Brennan might never have been caught. He could have kept poisoning people for years. Sometimes people ask me if I'm proud of what I did. I tell them I'm not proud. I'm angry. I'm angry that it took a waitress with home test kits to discover what trained professionals were supposed to prevent. I'm angry that people died for money. And I'm angry that my grandmother's last words to me were about water tasting funny, because that's all she could remember through the confusion those chemicals caused. But I'm also determined. What happened in Bend can never happen again. Every glass of water should be safe. Every person deserves to trust that their government won't let them be poisoned for profit. My name is Lisa Martinez, and I helped expose the biggest case of environmental terrorism in Oregon's history. Sometimes, ordinary people have to do extraordinary things to protect the people they love. That's why I'm telling you this story. Because the water you're drinking right now might not be as safe as you think it is. And if something seems wrong, don't wait for someone else to speak up. Your life might depend on it. My name is Mark Patterson, and I've been a construction foreman for 18 years. I started swinging hammers right out of high school, worked my way up through framing, concrete, and heavy equipment operation. I've built everything from strip malls to luxury hotels along the Pacific coast. I've handled job sites in earthquakes, mudslides, and Pacific storms that would send most people running for cover. But what happened during the summer of 2023 inches, Bandon, Oregon changed everything I thought I knew about the ocean. And it taught me that sometimes the biggest predators aren't the ones we can see coming. The Ocean View Condominiums project was supposed to be my big break. 42 luxury units right on the bluff overlooking the Coquille River mouth, with private beach access and panoramic ocean views. The developer was paying top dollar, and I'd handpicked my crew from guys I'd worked with for years. We had our permits, our materials staged, and a timeline that would have us wrapped up before the winter storms hit. Bandon in early June was perfect. Clear skies, steady winds, and that clean ocean smell that makes you understand why people pay millions to live on the coast. Our job site sat on a 20-acre parcel about 50 feet above the beach, with a private road winding down to the water. The city had fast-tracked our permits because they wanted the tax revenue, and the locals seemed excited about the jobs we'd bring. The only strange thing was how empty the water looked. I'd worked coastal projects before, and usually you'd see fishing boats, pleasure craft, maybe some commercial vessels heading in and out of port. But the ocean off Bandon was eerily quiet. When I mentioned it to Tommy Reeves, our concrete guy who'd grown up here, he just shrugged and said the fishing had been weird all spring. Dead fish washing up for weeks now, he told me while we surveyed the foundation layout. Not the usual stuff either. Big salmon, but it's way too early for the runs. And they're all torn up, like something's been chewing on them. I figured it was just one of those natural cycles. Fish die-offs happen. Maybe red tide or some pollution issue the EPA would handle. We had a building schedule to keep and 42 units to frame, wire, and finish before October. But by the second week, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing on our beach walks during lunch breaks. The sand was littered with dead salmon, massive ones, some over 3 feet long. These weren't spawning fish that had died naturally. These had chunks missing. Huge, ragged bite marks that looked like they'd been made by something with teeth the size of railroad spikes. I'd seen shark bites before, working a hotel project down in California, but these were different. The bite radius was enormous, and there were multiple puncture patterns on each fish, like whatever killed them had grabbed, shaken, and torn rather than just taking a clean bite. Plus, we were barely a quarter mile from shore. Sharks that big don't usually hunt in water that shallow. My curiosity got the better of me. I drove to Bandon Marine Supply and bought a couple underwater cameras, the kind charter boat captains use to find fish. Nothing fancy, just waterproof digital cameras in weighted housings that I could drop off our work barge when we started the pier foundation. What those cameras showed me still gives me nightmares. The water 20 feet down was full of sharks. Not the small Pacific Coast sharks you might expect, but massive bull sharks, some over 12 feet long and thick as telephone poles. They moved in groups of 6 or 8, cruising back and forth along the river mouth like they were patrolling territory. Their movements were coordinated, purposeful, nothing like the random feeding behavior you'd expect from sharks. I knew enough about marine life to understand this was impossible. Bull sharks are tropical and subtropical species. They don't live in Oregon waters, especially not in the numbers I was seeing. The Pacific coast has salmon sharks, maybe some great whites further offshore, but nothing like what my cameras were recording. I showed the footage to Jack Morrison, the Marina harbor master who'd been working these waters for 30 years. His face went white when he saw it. Jesus Christ, Mark, how many of those things are down there? At least 20 that I've counted, probably more. Jack shook his head slowly. Water temperature's been running 15 degrees above normal all spring. Coast Guard's been getting reports of damaged nets, boats with chunks taken out of their hulls. We thought it was floating debris or maybe equipment failures, but he trailed off, staring at the footage of a bull shark longer than my pickup truck gliding through water that should have been too cold for it to survive. The next morning, I found the first seal. It had washed up near our beach access, and it looked like it had been put through a wood chipper. The bite patterns matched what I'd seen on the salmon, but scaled up. Whatever had killed this seal had teeth that could punch through marine mammal blubber like it was tissue paper. I called the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, figuring they'd want to know about an invasive predator species setting up shop in state waters. The biologist I talked to was polite but dismissive. "Mr. Patterson, bull sharks occasionally range into northern waters during warm weather events. What you're describing sounds like normal predation behavior. We appreciate the report, but normal? Lady, I've got footage of at least 20 sharks over 10 feet long hunting in coordinated groups in 40 feet of water. That's not normal anything. Sir, without proper documentation and specimen collection, we can't verify." I hung up on her. Government bureaucrats always want paperwork and procedures, while the real world is going to hell around them. The city tourism office was even worse. When I tried to show them my footage, the director actually asked me to stop recording video of marine life near the beach access. "Mr. Patterson, Bandon's economy depends on summer tourism. Unsubstantiated reports of dangerous marine life could severely impact our visitor numbers. I'm sure you understand the economic ramifications." I understood. All right. I understood that money was more important than public safety, and that my construction project's success depended on keeping my mouth shut about the killing machines setting up camp in our backyard. But the sharks weren't staying quiet. The first boat attack happened on a Tuesday morning in late June. The Sarah Marie, a 28-foot charter boat, was heading out for a half-day salmon trip with 4 tourists from Portland. They were barely past the river mouth when something hit them from below. Captain Dave Hendricks brought the boat back with a 6-foot gash in the fiberglass hull and a story that nobody wanted to believe. He'd felt the impact, looked over the side, and seen a bull shark longer than his boat rolling away in the water. The bite mark in his hull matched the tooth spacing I'd been documenting on the dead fish and seals. "Thing was massive," Dave told me at the marina that evening. "Had to be 14, 15 feet. And there were others. I counted at least 6 of them circling us before I got the hell out of there." The Coast Guard classified it as a marine collision with unknown object. The insurance company blamed floating debris. Dave knew better, but he also knew that talking about giant sharks would end his charter business overnight. I started spending every spare minute monitoring the cameras, documenting the sharks' behavior patterns. They were learning, adapting. The first week, they'd stayed in the deeper water near the river channel. But as the summer progressed, they started hunting closer to shore, following the salmon runs that brought their prey into increasingly shallow water. By early July, they were hunting in water barely 15 feet deep. The attacks escalated on July 4th weekend. A family from Eugene was fishing from the rocks near Bandon State Park when something grabbed their 10-year-old son's line. The boy held on, thinking he'd hooked a big salmon, until a 12-foot bull shark breached the surface and kept coming. I was on the beach that day, checking our construction access road, when I heard the screaming. I ran toward the sound and saw the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. The shark had the boy's fishing rod in its mouth and was thrashing in water that couldn't have been more than 4 feet deep. The kid was being dragged toward deeper water while his parents grabbed for him. I didn't think. I just ran into the surf and tackled the kid, pulling him back toward shore while his father grabbed the fishing line and snapped it. The shark rolled once, showing us a mouth full of teeth like white daggers, then disappeared back toward deeper water. The boy lived, but he lost 2 fingers and needed 68 stitches. The official report blamed a large marine animal, species undetermined. The family was paid to sign a non-disclosure agreement with the state tourism board. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those teeth, about the intelligence I'd seen in the shark's eye when it looked at me in the surf. These weren't mindless eating machines. They were apex predators that had moved into new territory and were systematically learning to hunt in an environment they'd never encountered before. The water temperature readings confirmed my worst fears. The ocean off Oregon had warmed by 15 degrees since spring, creating a thermal corridor that allowed tropical species to survive in what had always been temperate waters. Climate change wasn't just melting ice caps and raising sea levels, it was fundamentally reshuffling marine ecosystems, bringing deep-water predators into contact with human populations that had no evolutionary experience with them. 2 days later, a surfer disappeared near Devil's Punch Bowl. They found pieces of his wetsuit and his surfboard, bitten cleanly in half. The bite radius matched my measurements from the seal and salmon attacks, but the surf spot where he'd been riding waves was in less than 6 feet of water. The sharks had learned to hunt in the shallows. I tried again to contact the authorities, the marine biologists, anyone who would listen. But by then, word had gotten around that I was the construction guy spreading shark hysteria and hurting local business. My calls weren't returned. My emails were ignored. The local newspaper ran an editorial about irresponsible fear-mongering that didn't mention me by name but made it clear who they were talking about. My construction project was falling apart too. 3 of my guys quit after seeing my shark footage. The developer was getting pressure from the city to keep quiet about marine life issues, and I was developing a reputation as the crazy contractor who thought Jaws had moved to Oregon. But I couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop documenting. Every day, the sharks were there, patrolling the waters where families brought their children to play in the surf. On July 15th, my worst nightmare came true. I was on the job site, trying to focus on foundation work, when I heard the screaming from the beach below. A family with 2 young children had been waiting in the shallows near our beach access. The kids were maybe 20 yards from shore, playing in water that barely came up to their knees. I grabbed my binoculars and saw the fin cutting through the water toward them. A massive bull shark in less than 3 feet of water, moving like a guided missile toward the children. I ran, crashed through the beach grass, vaulted the access fence, and sprinted across the sand screaming warnings. The parents heard me and started calling their kids back, but it was too late. The shark hit the 8-year-old girl like a freight train. The water exploded red, and for a horrible moment, she disappeared completely. Then she surfaced, screaming, with the shark still attached to her leg. I hit the water running and grabbed the girl under her arms, pulling backward while the shark thrashed and tried to drag her deeper. Her father reached us at the same time, and together we managed to break the shark's grip. It rolled away, frustrated, then circled back for another pass. We got the girl to shore, but she'd lost her left leg below the knee. Her brother was in shock, unhurt but screaming. The parents were covered in their daughter's blood, trying to stop the bleeding while screaming for help. The girl survived, but barely. The attack made national news, despite the tourism board's efforts to downplay it. Suddenly, marine biologists who'd ignored my calls for months were flying in from universities across the country to study the unprecedented bull shark population in Oregon waters. Too little, too late. The beaches were finally closed to swimming on July 20th, after 3 more attacks in a single week. But the damage was done. The sharks had established breeding populations in the warming waters. They weren't visitors anymore. They were residents. My construction project was canceled. The developer cited changing environmental conditions and insurance liability concerns. 42 luxury condominiums became a liability no one wanted to touch. I couldn't work waterfront projects anymore. Every time I got near the ocean, I'd see those fins cutting through the shallows, those black eyes scanning for prey. I'd wake up at night in cold sweats, hearing the screams of that little girl, feeling the weight of the shark as it tried to drag her into deeper water. The sharks are still there. Marine biologists now confirm that climate change has permanently altered the Pacific Northwest's marine ecosystem. Bull sharks, tiger sharks, and other tropical predators have established year-round populations in waters that were too cold for them just 5 years ago. 52 people died along the Oregon coast before the population stabilized. Dozens more were injured. Bandon's economy collapsed when tourists stopped coming. The fishing industry was devastated. I testified before Congress about what I'd witnessed, about the reality of marine ecosystem collapse and the urgent need for coastal climate adaptation. My documentation became crucial evidence in climate change litigation that finally forced the government to fund emergency monitoring systems. But it took 3 years and 52 lives for anyone to listen to what I'd been trying to tell them from the beginning. These days, I stick to inland construction projects. Mountain cabins, desert developments, anywhere that's at least 100 miles from the ocean. I still have nightmares about those black eyes in the shallows, about teeth the size of railroad spikes, and predators that learn to hunt where children play. The ocean isn't safe anymore, and in a warming world, nowhere is safe from the things that climate change is bringing to our shores. The sharks are still hunting in the shallows, and they're getting better at it every day. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been a bank teller for 12 years. I started right out of high school at First National in Eugene, Oregon, and worked my way up to senior teller and customer service supervisor. I've handled everything from robbery attempts to computer system crashes, angry customers screaming about overdraft fees, and elderly folks who needed help with basic transactions. I thought I'd seen it all in the banking world. But what happened during 1 week in Prairie City, Oregon, changed everything I thought I knew about memory, trust, and the people we let into our lives. Sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones who break down your door. They're the ones who already have the keys. It was early March when Mom called. Her voice sounded weak and shaky, nothing like the strong woman who raised me alone after Dad died. She'd been battling cancer for 6 months, and the treatments were getting harder. The doctors in Prairie City weren't sure how much time she had left, but they said it could be weeks, maybe a month. I immediately requested 2 weeks of family leave from the bank. My supervisor, Janet, was understanding. She knew how close Mom and I were, and she promised my position would be waiting when I got back. Prairie City is one of those small Oregon towns where everybody knows everybody. Population barely 800, one main street, 2 churches, and a grocery store that closes at 6. Mom's house sat on Elm Street, a tiny 2-bedroom place with a wraparound porch and a garden she'd tended for 30 years. I'd grown up there, but after college, the small-town life felt too confining. Eugene offered better opportunities, more independence, and frankly, more privacy than a place where the mailman knows your business before you do. I drove the 3 hours from Eugene on a Sunday afternoon, my car packed with 2 weeks' worth of clothes and enough work to keep me busy during Mom's nap times. The plan was simple: help with her medical appointments, make sure she was taking her medications properly, handle any paperwork or financial issues, and spend quality time together while I still could. Then I'd drive back to Eugene, return to work, and visit on weekends until the end came. Mom looked terrible when I arrived. She'd lost another 20 pounds since Christmas, and her skin had that gray pallor that cancer patients get when the treatments stop working. But her mind was sharp as ever. We spent Sunday evening going through her medical files, organizing her medications, and making a schedule for the week ahead. She had 3 doctor appointments, physical therapy twice, and a meeting with her lawyer to update her will. I made notes in my day planner, the same system I used at the bank to track important customer appointments and deadlines. Monday morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom feeling refreshed and ready to tackle the week. Mom was already awake in the kitchen, making coffee the old-fashioned way in her aluminum percolator. We had breakfast together, then I helped her get dressed for her 10 o'clock appointment with Dr. Martinez, her oncologist. I remember looking at my watch as we walked to the car. It was 9:15 a.m., March 8th. Then I woke up, but it wasn't Tuesday morning like it should have been. My phone said Monday, March 15th. I stared at the screen, thinking it was some kind of glitch. I checked my watch, then the clock on the nightstand, then the kitchen wall clock. All of them said the same thing: a full week had somehow vanished from my life. I called for Mom, but the house was silent. Her bedroom was empty, the bed made with hospital corners the way she'd taught me as a kid. But something was wrong with the room. It was too clean, too organized. All her personal items were gone. The family photos from her dresser, the jewelry box Dad had given her, even her reading glasses that usually sat on the nightstand. It looked like a hotel room after checkout. I ran through the house, searching for any sign of where she might be. That's when I found the envelope on the kitchen table, with my name written in my own handwriting. Inside were funeral programs. Mom's funeral programs. The service had been held on Wednesday, March 10th at Prairie City Methodist Church. Burial followed at Hillcrest Cemetery. According to the program, I had delivered the eulogy and served as the primary executor of her estate. I had no memory of any of it. My hands shook as I searched through the stack of papers under the envelope. Sympathy cards addressed to me, signed by neighbors and family friends I'd known my whole life. Thank you notes in my own handwriting, thanking people for their flowers and support during this difficult time. A receipt from Miller's funeral home showing payment in full for funeral services, signed by me. Legal documents transferring ownership of the house to me, with my signature notarized 3 days earlier. None of it made sense. I would never forget my own mother's death. I would never forget planning her funeral, delivering her eulogy, or watching them lower her casket into the ground. Those aren't the kind of memories that just disappear, even with grief or shock or medication. I drove straight to Miller's funeral home. Frank Miller had buried half the town over the past 40 years, including my father when I was 16. He was waiting for me in his office like he'd been expecting me. "Sarah?" he said, his voice gentle but concerned. "How are you holding up? You seemed so distant during the arrangements. I was worried about you." "Frank, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Everything you remember about the funeral arrangements." He looked confused. "You don't remember? You came in Monday evening after your mother passed. You were very specific about what you wanted. The Methodist service, Hillcrest burial plot next to your father, closed casket because of how the cancer had affected her appearance. You handled everything professionally, but you seemed, I don't know how to describe it, like you were sleepwalking through the conversation." "What do you mean, sleepwalking?" "You kept checking your watch like you had somewhere else to be. And you asked the strangest questions. You wanted to know if we kept security footage of family consultations and whether anyone else had access to our cremation records. Then you asked about preserving medical evidence in cases of suspicious death. I told you there was nothing suspicious about your mother's passing. Dr. Martinez had been treating her cancer for months. I left the funeral home with more questions than answers and drove to Prairie City Community Bank. I'd been banking there since I was 18, and the staff knew me well. Denise at the customer service desk smiled when I walked in, then her expression shifted to concern. "Sarah, honey, are you okay? You seemed so upset when you were here Thursday." "Thursday? You withdrew $25,000 in cash from your mother's account. I tried to talk you into a cashier's check instead, but you insisted on cash. Said you needed to pay some bills immediately and couldn't wait for checks to clear. $25,000. That was nearly everything Mom had saved over her lifetime. I had no memory of withdrawing that money, and I certainly didn't have it now. The security footage showed me standing at Denise's window, but something was wrong with how I moved. My posture was too straight, my movements too deliberate. I looked like a robot programmed to act human. When Denise handed me the money, I counted it twice with mechanical precision, then put it in a manila envelope without any emotion on my face. Denise, did I say anything about what the money was for? You said it was for medical expenses that insurance wouldn't cover. But when I asked which hospital or treatment center, you just stared at me for about 10 seconds, then said, various providers. That wasn't like you at all, Sarah. You're usually so chatty and specific about everything. I spent the afternoon driving around town, stopping at every business where someone might have seen me during the missing week. The pattern was always the same. People remembered conversations with me that I couldn't recall. The grocery store clerk said I'd bought cleaning supplies and garbage bags on Tuesday. The hardware store owner said I'd rented a carpet cleaner Wednesday morning. The post office worker said I'd mailed several large packages to addresses in Portland and Seattle. All of these interactions were described the same way. I seemed distant, mechanical, like I was following a script I didn't quite understand. That evening, I sat in Mom's kitchen trying to piece together what had happened. I found a pill organizer in the pantry with my name on it, filled with medications I didn't recognize. White pills, blue pills, small yellow capsules. No prescription labels, no indication of what they were supposed to treat. I took photos of everything and decided to drive to Eugene the next morning to have them analyzed. But first, I needed to see Dr. Martinez. If Mom had died of cancer, he would have been involved. He could tell me about her final days, maybe explain why I couldn't remember them. Dr. Martinez's office was in the small medical complex behind the hospital. His nurse said he could see me between appointments, and I waited in the same room where I'd brought Mom for so many chemotherapy consultations. Sarah, he said when he entered, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mother was a remarkable woman. But I have to ask, are you feeling all right? When you came to collect her medical files last Tuesday, you seemed confused about basic facts regarding her treatment. I came to collect her files? You insisted on taking all of her records, including lab results and imaging studies from the past 6 months. You said you needed them for insurance purposes, but then you asked some very unusual questions. You wanted to know if we tested for environmental toxins or heavy metals in her blood work. When I explained that wasn't part of her cancer treatment protocol, you became agitated and demanded to know if anyone else had access to her medical information. Dr. Martinez, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did my mother die of cancer? His face went pale. Sarah, what kind of question is that? Of course she died of cancer. The metastasis to her liver and lungs, we discussed the progression extensively. You were with her for every appointment, every scan result, every treatment decision. But you just said I seemed confused about her treatment when I came for the files. Well, yes. You kept asking about toxicology tests and whether her symptoms could have been caused by poisoning. I explained that advanced cancer can mimic many conditions, but you seemed convinced that someone had been giving her something harmful. I assumed it was grief affecting your thinking. I left his office with a growing certainty that something terrible had happened to my mother, and someone had been controlling my actions to cover it up. But who? And how? The answer came that evening when I decided to search Mom's house more thoroughly. In the basement, hidden behind the water heater, I found a small digital camera. When I checked the memory card on Mom's computer, I discovered hundreds of hours of footage showing me moving through the house like a sleepwalker. The videos were horrifying. They showed me cleaning obsessively, scrubbing surfaces with bleach, removing items from the house, and loading them into garbage bags. In one clip, I was standing in the kitchen at 3 a.m., methodically washing dishes that were already clean. In another, I was in Mom's bedroom, stripping the bed and replacing sheets with military precision. But the most disturbing footage showed me sitting at the kitchen table, signing documents while someone off-camera gave me instructions. I could hear a man's voice, patient and encouraging, telling me exactly what to write. Very good, Sarah. Now sign the bank authorization. Remember, you're taking care of your mother's final expenses. Now the property transfer. Your mother wanted you to have everything. Perfect. The funeral home payment. Your mother would be proud of how you're handling this. I recognized that voice. It was Mr. Thompson, Mom's next-door neighbor. He'd lived there for 15 years, always friendly, always helpful. The kind of neighbor who shoveled your driveway without being asked and brought in your mail when you were on vacation. I felt sick as I watched myself responding to his commands with robotic obedience. Whatever he'd been giving me had turned me into a puppet, following his instructions while my conscious mind was switched off. The final video was time-stamped the night before I'd supposedly woken up. It showed Thompson entering the house with a key, checking my pulse while I slept, then carefully placing pills in my mouth and making sure I swallowed them. Before leaving, he adjusted my alarm clock and placed the envelope of funeral documents on the kitchen table. I had to find out what he'd done to my mother and why. The next morning, I pretended to take the pills Thompson had left for me, but I spit them out as soon as he wasn't watching. For the first time in a week, my head began to clear, though I still felt groggy and disoriented. I needed to stay alert long enough to get evidence of what he'd been doing. Thompson came over around noon, just like the videos showed he'd been doing all week. He let himself in with his duplicate key and found me sitting in the living room. Sarah, sweetheart, how are you feeling today? Confused, I said honestly. I can't remember anything about Mom's funeral. Did I really speak at the service? Of course you did. You gave a beautiful eulogy about her garden and how she taught you to plant tomatoes. Everyone was very moved. But Mom had never gardened. She'd always said she had a black thumb and killed every plant she touched. Thompson was making up memories that never existed. Mr. Thompson, can I ask you something? Did you ever help Mom with her medications? She had so many pills to keep track of. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Sometimes I'd remind her to take them if I saw her forgetting. Why do you ask? I found some pills in the house that aren't prescribed to either of us. I was wondering if maybe they were left over from someone else's prescription. I wouldn't know anything about that. Maybe your mother was trying some natural supplements. She was always looking for alternative treatments. That was another lie. Mom was deeply skeptical of anything that wasn't prescribed by a doctor. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. I was just about to make a pot. While I was in the kitchen, I turned on my phone's voice recorder. When I returned with the coffee, Thompson was examining the pill organizer I'd deliberately left on the coffee table. "Sarah, you need to keep taking these. They're helping you cope with the grief. Without them, you might have another breakdown like you did Tuesday night." "What kind of breakdown?" "You were hysterical, screaming that someone had hurt your mother. You tried to call the police, but they could see you were having a grief-induced psychotic episode. That's when Dr. Martinez prescribed these medications to help you stay calm and focused. But I'd never met with Dr. Martinez about psychiatric medications, and he'd never mentioned any breakdown during our conversation. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you directly. Did someone poison my mother?" His face went completely still. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the coffee table. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah, you're having another episode. Take your medication, and these thoughts will go away." "What if I don't want them to go away?" He stood up and moved toward me, no longer bothering to hide his intentions. "Then we'll have to try a different approach." He pulled a syringe from his jacket pocket and grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away, but the residual effects of whatever he'd been giving me made my movements slow and clumsy. "Your mother was stealing from me," he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. "She figured out I'd been endorsing her social security checks and depositing them in my account. Said she was going to report me to the police. So I started putting antifreeze in her orange juice. Just a little bit each day, enough to make her sicker than the cancer already was making her. You killed her. I ended her suffering, and I used you to clean up the evidence. Do you know how easy it is to control someone with the right combination of psychiatric medications? I've been testing the formula on half the elderly residents in this town. Memory suppressants, compliance enhancers, suggestibility boosters. You've been my most successful subject." He pushed the needle into my arm before I could stop him. Almost immediately, I felt my thoughts becoming fuzzy and distant. "Now you're going to sign one more document transferring your mother's life insurance to me, and then you're going to drive back to Eugene and never think about any of this again. In a few months, I might visit you there. I could use someone with access to bank systems for my next project." But I'd been recording everything. As the drug took effect, I managed to hit the send button on my phone, uploading the recording to my cloud storage account. Then I fumbled for my car keys. "Where are you going?" Thompson asked. "Back to Eugene, like you said. But instead of driving toward the highway, I turned toward the state police station 20 miles away. The massive dose of whatever he'd injected was making me sick and disoriented. I could barely keep the car on the road, but I had to reach help before I lost consciousness completely. I made it halfway before the drug overcame me. The car drifted off the road and hit a fence post. I managed to dial 911 before everything went black. "This is 911. What's your emergency?" "My name is Sarah Chen. Check my phone." Recording. "Thompson killed my mother. Prairie City." I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. The state police had found my phone and listened to the recording. They'd arrested Thompson and discovered a laboratory in his basement where he'd been manufacturing experimental psychiatric drugs. Blood tests confirmed I'd been given massive doses of memory suppressants and behavioral control medications. The investigation revealed that Thompson had been testing his drug formulas on elderly Prairie City residents for over 5 years. He'd stolen more than $200,000 in Social Security and pension benefits from victims whose families thought they were dying of natural causes. My mother wasn't his first murder. She was his 5th. The memory damage turned out to be partially permanent. Even now, 2 years later, I can't remember large chunks of my childhood. I have to rely on photos and documents to piece together my own history. I never know if a memory is real or something my drugged brain constructed to fill in the gaps. Thompson received 5 life sentences without parole. The case led to new laws requiring better oversight of caregivers who have access to elderly people's finances and medications. I testified before the state legislature about the need to protect vulnerable seniors from predators who exploit both their trust and their isolation. I never went back to work at the bank. I couldn't trust my own memory enough to handle other people's money. Instead, I became an advocate for elder abuse victims, helping families recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation and memory manipulation. The hardest part isn't the missing memories, it's never being sure which memories I can trust. Every day, I have to question whether my thoughts and feelings are really mine or something Thompson programmed into my brain during that lost week. But I remember this: evil doesn't always break down your door. Sometimes it comes with a friendly smile and a spare key, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to steal everything you are. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I've been working retail for 12 years. Started as a bag girl at 16, worked my way up to head cashier at Miller's Grocery here in John Day, Oregon. I've dealt with angry customers, shoplifters, and even had a gun pulled on me during a robbery 3 years back. I thought I'd seen everything this small town could throw at me. But what happened last winter in the courthouse basement didn't just change what I knew about my hometown, it changed what I knew about death itself. Some spirits don't rest until justice is served, and some truths are so violent they can reach across a century to drag you into hell. December 2023 was rough for us. My husband Jake got hurt bad in a logging accident, crushed 3 ribs and messed up his back real good. Workers' comp barely covered the medical bills, and with him out of work, we were falling behind on everything. The grocery store cut everyone's hours after Thanksgiving, so I was only getting maybe 25 hours a week. Not nearly enough. That's when Mrs. Patterson from the county office called. They needed someone to help clean out the courthouse basement before the new heating system got installed. Cash job, under the table, $15 an hour. With Christmas coming and Jake's prescription costs, I couldn't say no. The courthouse is this old brick building from 1889, sits right in the middle of town square. Most folks only go there for marriage licenses or property records. I'd never been in the basement before. Mrs. Patterson gave me the key on a Tuesday morning and said to just bag up anything that looked like old junk. The first thing I noticed was the cold. Not winter cold, something deeper, like the air itself was sick. The basement was bigger than I expected. Long hallway with 3 rooms branching off. Concrete walls, single bare bulb hanging in each room. But those bulbs kept flickering, casting shadows that moved when they shouldn't. I started in the first room, working my way through box after box. Old court records, tax documents, stuff going back decades. But I kept hearing things. Footsteps upstairs when I knew the building was empty. Voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Chinese, maybe? When I'd stopped to listen, everything went quiet. The temperature kept dropping. My breath started coming out in little puffs, even though the building's heat was supposed to be working. I found myself working faster, wanting to get out of there. But every time I looked at the door, it seemed farther away than before. That's when I noticed the wall. There was this section where the concrete looked different, newer somehow, like it had been patched up. But as I stared at it, I swear I could see handprints pressed against it from the inside. Like someone had been trying to claw their way out. When I blinked, the prints disappeared. The voices started again, clearer this time. A man's voice, desperate. "Please, children, no hurt children." Then, a woman screaming. Then nothing. I should have run. Every instinct told me to drop everything and get out, but my hands moved on their own, working stones loose from the wall. Behind them was a gap, and in that gap was a metal box that felt ice cold to touch. The box was covered in rust that looked like dried blood. Someone had scratched words into the lid. Time capsule, truth for 2024 in handwriting that seemed to shift and crawl as I read it. When I opened it, the temperature plummeted. The light bulb above me exploded in a shower of sparks, leaving me in darkness. But somehow, I could still see the contents of the box, like they were glowing with their own sick light. Old photographs, sepia-toned and twisted with age. The top one showed a crowd gathered in our town square. Everyone dressed up fancy, American flags everywhere, but their faces, God, their faces were wrong. Stretched and distorted, eyes too wide, mouths open and silent, screams. Written on the back in that crawling handwriting, John Day Centennial Celebration, July 4th, 1924. I flipped through more photos with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Each image was worse than the last. Parade floats dripping with something dark, families posing by the courthouse, but the children in the photos had no eyes. Kids in old-fashioned clothes holding what looked like severed fingers. Then I found the photo that made me vomit right there on the concrete floor. 20 men in white robes and hoods, standing in a circle around a burning cross. But hanging from that cross weren't just pieces of wood. There were 4 bodies, an older man, a woman, 2 small children, all Chinese, all charred beyond recognition. The robed figures were holding pieces of flesh, eating them. Under the photo were typed documents that wrote themselves as, "I watched," words appearing in fresh blood. Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, John Day chapter #47. A membership list with names that made my blood freeze. At the top, James Hartwell, my great-grandfather. The handwritten confession started writing itself too, invisible hands moving across the page. They won't stop screaming. Even after we killed them, even after we burned them, they won't stop screaming. Every night I hear the Chen family calling my name. The children. Jesus Christ, what we did to those children. We didn't just kill them, we took our time. Made them watch each other die. The old grandmother, we made her eat her own fingers before Patterson cut her throat. The woman, I can't write what we did to her. The children begged in English, perfect English, said they were Americans too. We laughed and started with the smallest one. Their store wasn't the real reason. We just wanted to hurt something innocent. Wanted to see how much pain we could cause before they died. The devil himself couldn't have thought up what we did in that basement. We buried what was left in the teen woods past Miller's Creek. But they followed us home. Every member of our chapter started seeing them, burnt, mangled, begging for mercy we'd never given. Henderson put a gun in his mouth after 3 days. Williams hung himself from the same tree we'd used to torture the boy. I'm writing this because they won't let me sleep. They won't let me die. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that basement, watching Patterson peel the skin off that little girl while she was still alive, hearing her call for her mama in perfect English. This town is cursed, built on screaming. And someday, someone will find this box, and then the Chen family will finally have their revenge. The paper was signed in fresh blood. James Hartwell, damned forever. As I read the last word, every light in the basement came back on. But the bulbs were shining red now, casting everything in the color of blood. And I wasn't alone anymore. They stood in the corners of the room, barely visible at first. A Chinese family, 2 adults, 2 children, an elderly woman. But they were wrong, so wrong. Burnt flesh hanging in strips, fingers missing, eyes gouged out. The smallest child, maybe 6 years old, had no skin left on her face. They didn't speak with their mouths. The words came from inside my head, in perfect English. You found us. You know the truth. Now you must choose. Choose what? I whispered. Justice or silence. There is no middle path. The woman stepped closer. Half her skull was caved in, but she moved with terrible purpose. They eat our flesh still. Their children. Their grandchildren. Our pain feeds them, makes them strong, rich, happy. While we scream in the dark. The eldest child, a boy maybe 8 years old, held up his hands. All 10 fingers had been cut off at the knuckles. They play with our bones, make jokes about the screaming Chinamen, laugh about how we begged. But you, the father said, his throat opened wide enough to see his spine, you carry their blood, you are Hartwell, you can end this. The grandmother shuffled forward. Her feet had been cut off, so she dragged herself across the floor, leaving a trail of black blood. Choose quickly, child. The living ones know you are here. They come. I could hear them now, footsteps upstairs, moving fast, voices calling my name. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Miller, Chief Brennan. But their voices were wrong too, distorted, like they were speaking through mouths full of rotting meat. What do you want me to do? I asked. The Chen family smiled, and their burnt faces split open like rotten fruit. Tell the truth, all of it, every horrible detail. Let the world know what kind of monsters built this place. And if I don't? The little girl without a face giggled, a sound like breaking glass. Then you stay here with us. Forever. Screaming in the dark while they feast on your pain. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear Mrs. Patterson's voice. Emma? Emma, where are you? We know you found something. Just give it back, and we can all forget this happened. But her voice was coming from below me now, from under the concrete. Like she was buried alive down there. The Chen family was fading, becoming transparent. Choose now, they whispered in unison. Justice or damnation. I grabbed the box and ran. The basement hallway stretched out impossibly long in front of me, doors on both sides that hadn't been there before. Behind each door, I could hear screaming, men's voices begging for mercy, the sound of flesh being torn from bone, laughter that echoed from hell itself. The stairs seemed to move under my feet, trying to drag me back down. The walls bled. The ceiling pressed down, forcing me to crawl on my hands and knees. But I kept moving, clutching that cursed box against my chest. When I finally burst through the courthouse's front door, the sun was setting. But I'd only been down there for 2 hours. Time moves differently in places where evil has taken root. My car wouldn't start. The engine turned over, but every time I tried to put it in drive, the radio started playing screaming, children's voices, begging in Chinese and English both. I turned the radio off, but the screaming kept coming through the speakers. I walked home, 12 blocks, carrying that box. People I passed on the street turned to stare, but their faces were wrong. Melted. Distorted, like they were wearing masks made of burnt flesh. Jake was waiting on the porch when I got home. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't Jake. Same clothes, same hair, but the eyes were black holes, no light in them at all. "Where's the box, Emma?" "Not," Jake asked. His voice was coming from somewhere else, echoing inside his chest like he was already dead. I ran around to the back of the house, climbed through our bedroom window. The real Jake was asleep on the bed, breathing heavy from his pain medication. When I touched his face, he felt warm and real and alive. That's when I knew the Chen family had been telling the truth. The evil in this town wasn't just history. It was still here, still feeding, still growing stronger. I hid the box under our bed and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that basement. Watching James Hartwell, my own blood, torture a family to death while his friends laughed and took pictures. The nightmares got worse. Every night, I lived through the murders from the victim's perspective. Felt the knife cutting into my skin. Felt the fire burning my flesh. Heard my children screaming for help that would never come. During the day, I started seeing them everywhere. The Chen family, always watching from the corners of my vision. In mirrors, in windows, in the reflection of puddles, waiting for me to keep my promise. But when I tried to tell people what I'd found, the words wouldn't come out right. Instead of explaining about the documents, I'd hear myself talking about the weather or asking about someone's family, like something was controlling my mouth, making me say the wrong things. Jake noticed I was losing weight, not sleeping. "You look like hell, Em. What's going on?" I tried to tell him about the basement, the box, the ghosts, but all that came out was, "Just tired from working so much." The Chen family appeared behind him, shaking their heads sadly. "He cannot hear the truth," the father said. "Only blood can break the curse, only Hartwell blood." That's when I understood. They didn't just want me to tell their story. They wanted me to become part of it. I quit the cleaning job. Told Mrs. Patterson I was too sick to continue. She smiled when I said it, but her teeth were filed to points. "Of course, dear, we understand completely. Sometimes the past is better left buried." But the Chen family wouldn't let me rest. They started appearing in our house, standing by our bed while we slept. The little girl would sit on my chest, her burnt fingers tracing patterns on my face. The boy would whisper in my ear about what it felt like to have his skin peeled off while he was still alive. "Tell them," they'd say. "Make them pay. Make them suffer like we suffered." The box started changing too. The rust spread across our bedroom floor like blood. The metal got so cold it burned to touch. And the documents inside began adding new pages, written in different hands. Confessions from all the clan members, describing their crimes in horrible detail. I learned things I wished I'd never known. About the torture chamber they'd built in Miller's basement. About the other families they'd killed, Native Americans, a black family passing through, anyone who threatened their vision of a pure white town. About the rituals they'd performed, trying to summon something evil to give them power. And they'd succeeded. Something had answered their call. Something that fed on pain and terror and kept their bloodlines strong for generations. The descendants weren't just covering up old crimes. They were still serving that thing, still feeding it victims when they could get away with it. Missing hikers, runaway kids, people nobody would look for. John Day wasn't just built on murder. It was a feeding ground. I tried to leave town with Jake, told him we needed a fresh start somewhere else. But every road out of John Day led back to the town square. GPS systems malfunctioned. Maps changed while we weren't looking. The town wouldn't let us go. "You made a promise," the Chen family reminded me. "Justice or damnation. There is no escape until you choose." That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't investigating the past. I was being recruited. The Hartwell family had always been special to the entity that controlled John Day. My great-grandfather hadn't just been a clan member. He'd been the sacrifice, the one who gave his soul to bring the thing through. And now it wanted another Hartwell. It wanted me. But the Chen family had other plans. "You can end this," they told me. But not with words, not with evidence. The only thing that stops a monster is becoming a bigger monster. They taught me things in my dreams. How to see through the illusions that kept the town hidden from the outside world. How to speak words that would call down fire from heaven. How to become an instrument of divine vengeance. I learned that I wasn't the first person to find that box. Others had discovered it over the years, tried to expose the truth. But the entity had corrupted them all, turned them into servants, made them forget or disappear or go insane. The Chen family had been waiting for someone with Hartwell blood, someone who could use their connection to the original sin to destroy it from within. On Christmas Eve, I made my choice. I took the box to the town square at midnight. All the descendants were there, waiting for me. Mayor Johnson, Chief Brennan, the Miller family, the Pattersons, dozens of them, all standing in a circle around the spot where the cross had burned 100 years ago. But they weren't alone. The thing they served was there too, a shadow with too many teeth, fed by a century of pain and murder. It had grown strong on the suffering of innocence, and now it wanted to feast on mine. "Give us the box, Emma," Mrs. Patterson said. Her voice was coming from multiple mouths now. "Join your family, take your place in the circle." They reached for me with hands that weren't quite human anymore. Fingers too long, skin like rotting leather, nails sharp as claws. That's when the Chen family appeared. Not as burnt corpses this time, but as they'd been in life, whole and healthy and blazing with righteous fury. They stood between me and the descendants, and their presence made the shadow thing writhe and scream. "You want Hartwell blood?" I called out to the entity. "Then take it all." I opened the box and pulled out the photographs, the confessions, all the evidence of what had been done. But now they were more than just paper. They were weapons, soaked in 100 years of injustice and crying out for vengeance. I spoke the words the Chen family had taught me, words in a language older than English or Chinese, words that called down judgment on the guilty and their children's children. The photographs burst into flames that spread to everything they touched. But this wasn't ordinary fire. It burned cold and white, and it only consumed the guilty. The descendants screamed as their flesh melted, but their pain fed back into the entity, making it stronger. That's when I understood the final lesson. The only way to destroy something fed by suffering was to make it choke on more pain than it could swallow. I cut my own throat with the rusty edge of the box. My blood splashed across the town square, mixing with the earth where innocent people had died. And in that moment, I became a conduit for every scream, every plea for mercy, every moment of agony that had built this cursed place. The entity tried to feed on my death, but instead it got the full weight of its victim's pain reflected back. A century of torture, concentrated into a single instant of divine retribution. It exploded like a star going supernova, taking the descendants with it. Their bodies crumbled to ash that scattered on a wind that smelled like justice. I should have died that night. But the Chen family caught my spirit as it tried to leave, held me together with their love and gratitude. "Your work is not finished," they told me. "There are others, other towns, other secrets, other monsters wearing human faces. So here I am, telling you this story. Still walking, still breathing, but not quite alive anymore. I can see the hidden places now, the spots where evil has taken root and grown strong. I can hear the voices of the victims, calling for someone to remember their names. Jake thinks I'm in Portland, working at a coffee shop and recovering from what happened. He sees me every few months when I visit, and I let him believe I'm healing. But I'm not the woman he married anymore. I'm something else now, part human, part ghost, part instrument of justice. I've been to 7 other small towns in Oregon since John Day, found similar boxes hidden in similar basements, exposed similar secrets, and each time the pattern is the same. A founding atrocity, generations of cover-ups, an entity that feeds on pain and keeps the guilty families in power. But now they have something to fear. If you're listening to this, and you live in a small town where certain families have always been in charge, where missing persons cases get closed too quickly, where people whisper about things that happened long ago, start digging. Look for the hidden places. Listen for the voices of the dead, because they're waiting for someone brave enough to tell their stories. And if you won't, I will. The Chen family walks with me now, along with the Washingtons from Fossil, the Ramirez family from Mitchell, the Crow children from Spray. All the victims, all the forgotten dead, all gathering strength for the final reckoning. Oregon's small towns have been feeding monsters for over a century, but the feast is almost over, and when it ends, every family that profited from innocent blood will answer for their sins. We're coming, we're all coming, and this time we're not going quietly into the dark. My name is Tom Martinez, and I've been driving delivery trucks for UPS for 8 years. I know every back road, every dirt path, and every hidden driveway in Southern Oregon. I've delivered packages in snowstorms, heat waves, and floods. I've dealt with angry dogs, crazy customers, and trucks that break down in the middle of nowhere. But what happened last winter near Cave Junction changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in those mountains. I started this job right out of high school. My dad always said I was good with directions and had a steady head on my shoulders. The pay was decent, the benefits were solid, and I liked being on the road instead of stuck in an office. After 8 years, I could drive my route with my eyes closed. I knew which houses had the mean dogs, which customers always wanted to chat for 20 minutes, and which roads turned into mud pits when it rained. My route covered the rural areas around Cave Junction, right up against the Siskiyou Mountains. Beautiful country, but remote. Some of these houses were miles apart, connected by narrow dirt roads that wound through thick forests. Cell service was spotty at best. If your truck broke down out there, you might be walking for hours before you found help. The company gave us these handheld scanners to track every package. Scan it when you pick it up, scan it when you deliver it. The system was pretty simple, and it kept the customers happy because they could track their stuff online. I also had a GPS unit in the truck, though after 8 years I barely needed it. Radio for dispatch, though that didn't work great in the mountains either. Most of my customers were good people, retirees who moved out there for the peace and quiet, some folks who worked remotely and wanted to get away from the city, a few old-timers whose families had been in those mountains for generations. They were always happy to see me because I was sometimes the only person they'd talk to all week. It was early December when the problems started. I remember because the first snow had just fallen, making the roads even trickier than usual. I was making my normal rounds when I got to the Henderson place. Henderson, a nice retired couple who lived about 5 miles up Deer Creek Road. Mrs. Henderson came out to meet me like always, but this time she looked upset. "Tom, did you already deliver our package yesterday?" she asked. I checked my scanner. "No, ma'am, this is the first delivery I've had for you this week. What package?" She showed me the tracking number on her phone. According to the website, a package had been delivered to their house the day before at 2:30 p.m., but I knew I hadn't been there. Yesterday I'd finished my route early and was back at the depot by 2. "That's weird," I said, looking at my own records. "My scanner doesn't show any delivery here yesterday. Let me call this in." But when I tried to radio dispatch, all I got was static. Cell service was dead too, like usual up there. I told Mrs. Henderson I'd look into it when I got back to town. That afternoon, I drove back up Deer Creek Road to see if maybe I'd dropped the package at the wrong house. About a quarter mile past the Henderson place, I found something that made my stomach drop. Scattered across the road were pieces of torn cardboard and shredded brown paper, UPS packaging material. I stopped the truck and got out to look closer. The cardboard wasn't just torn, it was shredded. Long, deep gashes ran through the material, like something with very sharp claws had ripped it apart. But these weren't bear claws. I'd seen plenty of bear damage over the years. Bears tore things apart, sure, but this was different. These cuts were too clean, too precise, and they were long, maybe 4 or 5 inches. Following the trail of debris, I found more torn packaging scattered into the trees. Some pieces were hanging from branches 20 feet off the ground. Whatever did this was strong enough to throw boxes that high and smart enough to climb. I gathered up what pieces I could find and brought them back to the depot. My supervisor, Dave, took one look at the shredded cardboard and shook his head. "Probably bears," he said. "Happens sometimes. They smell food in the packages and tear them apart looking for it." "Dave, I've seen bear damage. This isn't bears." He gave me that look. Supervisors give drivers when they think we're making excuses. "What else would it be, Tom? File a report with the customers for damaged goods and move on." But over the next 2 weeks, it kept happening. The Johnsons reported a package delivered that never made it to their door. The Mitchells found torn packaging in their woods with long claw marks. Always the same pattern, packages that showed as delivered in the system, but the customers never got them. And always that strange, precise damage to the packaging. I started paying closer attention to my deliveries in that area. That's when I noticed I wasn't the only one acting strange. The forest was too quiet. Usually those mountains were full of wildlife. Deer, squirrels, birds, but lately, the woods felt empty. Even the dogs in the area seemed spooked. They'd bark at shadows and refuse to go outside after dark. The customers started asking me if I'd seen anything unusual. Old Pete Morrison, who'd lived up there for 40 years, pulled me aside during a delivery. "Tom, you been noticing anything strange in these woods lately?" "Like what, Pete?" "Something's got all the animals scared. My hunting cameras haven't picked up a single deer in 2 weeks. That ain't natural." I thought about the shredded packages and those long claw marks. "Have you seen any bears around?" Pete shook his head. "Bears are hibernating by now. Besides, whatever's out there, it ain't no bear. Found tracks yesterday that didn't match anything I know. Too big for a cougar, wrong shape for a bear. And they had what looked like thumbs." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Pete had said. Tracks with thumbs. I went online and started searching for unusual animals in the Siskiyou Mountains. Most of what I found was the usual stuff: bears, cougars, maybe the occasional wolf. But then I found some older articles about Native American legends from the area. The Yurok tribe had stories about creatures they called bone walkers. According to the legends, these things lived deep in the mountain caves and only came out to hunt. They were described as tall, pale, and able to walk on either 2 legs or 4. The stories said they were intelligent, used tools, and had a taste for human flesh. I figured it was just old stories, but something about the description made my skin crawl. Especially the part about them being intelligent and using tools. The next week, I decided to set up my own trail camera near one of the problem areas. I had a decent hunting camera at home that I used during deer season. If something was stealing packages, maybe I could catch it on film. I mounted the camera on a tree about 50 yards from where I'd found the most torn packaging. The spot had a good view of the road and the edge of the forest. If anything came out to mess with deliveries, the camera would see it. 3 days later, I went back to check the SD card. What I saw in that footage still gives me nightmares. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. At first, everything looked normal, just the empty road and dark trees. Then something moved at the edge of the frame. At first I thought it was a person crawling on their hands and knees, but as it moved into better view, I realized this thing was way too big to be human. It was maybe 7 feet long from head to tail, moving on all 4s through the trees with a fluid, unnatural grace. Its limbs were too long for its body, like someone had stretched a person out on a rack. The skin looked pale, almost white in the glossed, infrared camera. But the worst part was how it moved. It wasn't clumsy like a bear or cautious like a deer. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. The creature stopped and turned toward the camera. For just a moment, I got a clear view of its face. It was almost human, but wrong. The proportions were off, the mouth too wide, the eyes too large. And when it opened its mouth, I could see rows of sharp teeth that definitely weren't human. Then it was gone, disappearing into the trees faster than anything that size should be able to move. I watched that footage over and over, trying to convince myself it was fake somehow. Maybe someone in a costume, or some kind of camera malfunction. But the more I watched, the more real it looked. The way it moved, the way the infrared picked up its body heat, This wasn't a hoax. I brought the footage to Dave the next morning, but he barely looked at it. "Tom, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I don't have time for it. You've got deliveries to make." "Dave, this thing is stealing our packages. Look at the footage." What I see is a blurry video that could be anything. Maybe it's a bear. Maybe it's someone's escaped livestock. Either way, it's not my problem unless it starts costing the company money. But it was costing money. More packages were going missing every week, and customers were getting angry. The insurance claims were adding up, and I was starting to notice something even more disturbing. The thing seemed to be getting bolder. At first, packages only went missing on remote roads where there were no witnesses. But lately, it was happening closer to populated areas. And I was starting to feel like something was watching me during my deliveries. It started as just a feeling. That creeping sensation you get when someone's staring at you. I'd be making a delivery and suddenly feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd look around, but never see anything. Just trees and shadows. Then I started seeing the eyes. They were always at the edge of my vision, just bright enough to catch in my peripheral vision. When I'd turn to look directly, they'd be gone. But I knew something was out there, watching me work. The first time I saw them clearly was during an evening delivery to the Thompson Ranch. It was getting dark, and I was hurrying to finish my route before I lost the light completely. As I walked back to my truck after dropping off their package, I saw two pale, reflective eyes watching me from the tree line about 50 yards away. They were too high off the ground to be a deer or a dog, too far apart to be a raccoon. And they didn't blink or look away when I stared back at them. They just watched me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. I got in my truck and drove away as fast as I safely could on that dirt road. That weekend, the Martins called me at home. Their dog, a big German shepherd named Rex, had been found dead in their yard. But it wasn't just dead, it had been torn apart and the bones were arranged in a neat pile next to their porch. "Tom, we know you've been having problems with packages getting stolen, Mrs. Martin said on the phone. "Do you think the same thing that's doing that killed our dog?" I didn't know what to say. Rex was a big, tough dog who'd chased off bears before. What could kill him and then arrange his bones like that? The next Monday, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I started carrying my shotgun in the truck. It was against company policy, but I didn't care anymore. Whatever was out there, it was getting more aggressive, and I wasn't going to be caught defenseless. I kept the gun hidden under a tarp behind my seat. If Dave found out, I'd probably get fired, but that seemed like a small price to pay for staying alive. For 2 weeks, everything seemed normal. No missing packages, no weird sightings, no feeling of being watched. I started to think maybe whatever it was had moved on to some other territory. I should have known better. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late January when my truck started making that grinding noise near Cedar Falls Road. I'd heard that sound before. The transmission was going out. I managed to limp the truck to a wide spot in the road before it died completely. I was about 3 miles from the nearest house, with no cell service and a radio that couldn't reach dispatch through the mountains. The sun was already getting low, and it would be dark in a couple of hours. I popped the hood and pretended to look at the engine, but I knew there was nothing I could do. This was going to require a tow truck. That's when I heard the branches breaking in the forest behind me. At first I thought it might be a deer or maybe someone's loose cattle, but the sound was wrong. Too deliberate, too rhythmic. Something large was moving through the trees, and it was headed my way. I grabbed my shotgun from under the tarp and checked to make sure it was loaded. The breaking branches were getting closer, and I could hear something else now, a clicking sound, like someone rapidly snapping their fingers. The creature emerged from the trees about 40 yards away from my truck. Seeing it on the trail camera footage was one thing. Seeing it in person was something else entirely. It was even bigger than I'd thought, probably 7 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs. Its skin was bone white and stretched tight over a frame that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd only heard humans described secondhand. Its arms were too long and ended in hands that had too many joints. Its legs bent in directions that didn't seem right. But the worst part was its face. It was almost human, but the jaw unhinged like a snake's, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. And it was smart. I could see it in those pale eyes as it looked at my broken-down truck, then at me, then back at the truck. It was figuring out the situation, planning its next move. The creature started circling my truck, staying just out of range of my shotgun. It moved with that same fluid grace I'd seen in the camera footage, but now I could hear the clicking sounds it made. They weren't random, there was a pattern to them, almost like it was talking to itself. I stayed by the driver's door, keeping the truck between me and the creature as much as possible. But it was smart enough to know what I was doing. Every time I moved, it adjusted its position to cut off my escape routes. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It picked up a piece of broken tree branch and started scraping it against my truck's side panels. Long, deliberate scratches in the paint. It was marking my truck the same way it had marked those packages. I was its prey now, and it was playing with me. The creature moved to the front of my truck and began systematically puncturing my tires with what looked like a sharpened deer antler. One by one, I heard the hiss of air escaping. It worked methodically, almost casually, like a mechanic working on a routine repair. When it finished with the tires, the creature sat back on its haunches and made that clicking sound again. But this time, it sounded different. It sounded like laughter. I realized I was trapped. The truck wouldn't run, the tires were flat, and this thing was between me and any possible help. My hands were shaking as I kept the shotgun pointed at it, but I didn't dare fire unless it actually attacked. I only had 5 shells, and I had a feeling I was going to need every one. The creature seemed to sense my fear. It tilted its head to one side, studying me with those intelligent eyes. Then it started moving closer. I backed against the truck and raised the shotgun. "Stay back!" I shouted, though I don't know why I thought talking to it would help. The creature stopped and tilted its head the other way, like it was curious about the sound I'd made. Then it opened that impossible mouth and made a sound that was almost like human speech, but twisted and wrong. That's when I heard the helicopter. The creature heard it too. Its head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time since it had appeared, it looked uncertain. The helicopter was getting closer, and the creature seemed to understand what that meant. It looked at me one more time, and I swear it looked disappointed. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest, so fast I barely saw it go. The helicopter belonged to the local search and rescue team. Someone had seen my truck on the road and called it in when they realized it had been there for hours without moving. They found me sitting in the cab, still holding my shotgun, shaking like a leaf. The paramedics said I was in shock. The sheriff took my statement, but I could tell he didn't believe a word of it. He kept asking if I'd been drinking or if I was on any medications. When I tried to show him the claw marks on my truck, he said they could have been made by anything. "Probably a bear," he said, same as David said about the packages. "They can get pretty aggressive when they're hungry." I quit UPS the next week and moved to Portland, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I started researching everything I could find about the Siskiyou Mountains and the creatures that might live there. That's when I found the historical reports. Dating back to the 1800s, there were accounts from loggers, miners, and hikers who'd encountered something matching the exact description of what I'd seen. They called it different names: the bone walker, the cave crawler, the mountain devil, yes, but the descriptions were all the same. A tall, pale, intelligent creature that lived in the mountain caves and hunted humans for food. 6 months later, I was contacted by a cryptozoologist named Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd heard about my encounter through some online forums. She was putting together an expedition to investigate the Siskiyou crawler, and she wanted me to guide them to the location where I'd seen it. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We went back in late summer with a full team of researchers and enough camera equipment to film a movie. We found the caves Pete Morrison had mentioned, deep in the mountains where no hiking trails went. Inside, we discovered evidence that something had been living there for a very long time. There were bones, lots of them. Most were from animals, deer, elk, smaller creatures, but some were human. Old bones, probably decades old, but also some that looked much more recent. They'd been cracked open and the marrow extracted. We also found tools, crude implements made from sharpened animal bones, but showing a level of intelligence and planning that no known animal possessed. Whatever lived in those caves could think, plan, and create. Dr. Chen's team documented everything and sent samples to labs for analysis. The bone marks didn't match any known predator. The tools showed clear signs of intelligent design, and the DNA samples they managed to extract didn't match anything in any database. The footage I'd captured with my trail camera became the centerpiece of Dr. Chen's research. After months of analysis, she concluded that the Siskiyou crawler represented either an unknown species of primate or possibly something even more unusual. But the creature had learned from our intrusion. After our expedition, the sightings stopped. No more missing packages. No more mysterious kills. It was like it had figured out that humans were studying it and decided to lay low. The Forest Service quietly increased patrols in the area, though they never said why. A few hiking trails were permanently closed. The official reason was unstable terrain, but locals knew better. I still get calls from Dr. Chen. Sometimes. She tells me about new sightings, usually from hikers or hunters who venture too far off the beaten path. The creature is still out there, still hunting, but it's learned to avoid areas where humans might have cameras or weapons. Sometimes I wonder if I should have kept my mouth shut about what I saw. Maybe if I'd just stayed quiet, people would be safer. But then I think about all those missing hikers over the years, all those unexplained disappearances in the mountains. At least now people know to be careful. The Siskiyou crawler is real. It's intelligent, it's dangerous, and it's still out there in those mountains. If you ever find yourself on a lonely road in the Siskiyous after dark, keep your doors locked, your engine running, and pray that you don't see those pale eyes watching you from the trees. Because once it sees you, it doesn't forget. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a forest ranger for the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department for 12 years. I started right out of college with a degree in forestry management and wilderness safety. I've handled everything from search and rescue operations to wildfire evacuations, bear encounters to lost hikers who thought they could tackle the Columbia River Gorge with nothing but a water bottle and flip-flops. I thought I'd seen it all in these woods. But what happened last summer around Echo, Oregon changed everything I thought I knew about time, sound, and the very nature of reality itself. Some places in the forest don't just echo your voice back to you, they echo your entire life. Echo sits right in the heart of the Columbia River Gorge, about 40 miles east of Portland. It's a tiny town, barely 700 people, surrounded by thousands of acres of dense forest and ancient volcanic rock formations. The area gets its name from the incredible acoustics. Sounds bounce off the canyon walls and rock faces in ways that can make you think someone's calling your name from miles away. At least, that's what we always told people. My patrol sector covers roughly 15,000 acres of the most remote wilderness in the gorge. I'm responsible for monitoring the hiking trails, checking camping permits, and making sure people don't get themselves killed trying to take selfies on cliff edges. I work alone most days. Just me and my truck, my radio, and enough gear to handle whatever the forest throws at me. My base radio has a range of about 20 miles on a good day, less when the weather's bad or if I'm down in one of the deeper valleys. The truck is a 2019 Ford F-250 with a heavy-duty suspension system and all-terrain tires. The back is loaded with rescue equipment, first aid supplies, climbing gear, and enough food and water for 3 days in case I get stuck somewhere. I've got a handheld GPS unit, a satellite phone for emergencies, and a digital voice, the recorder that I use for incident reports and trail condition updates. On July 15th, I got my first weird call about the echoes. A family of 4 had been hiking the Eagle Creek Trail when they heard what sounded like their 8-year-old daughter calling for help from somewhere deep in the woods. The problem was, their daughter was right there with them the whole time. They were spooked enough to hike back to the parking lot and call our emergency line. I drove out there that afternoon to check things out. Eagle Creek Trail is one of our most popular hikes. It's got waterfalls, swimming holes, and usually enough foot traffic that people feel safe. But this family had been alone on the trail, at least 2 miles from the nearest other hikers. I walked the same section they'd described, calling out and listening to the echoes bounce back from the canyon walls. Everything seemed normal at first. My voice would echo back in about 2 seconds, which is exactly what you'd expect with rock walls that far apart. But then I noticed something odd. When I called out, "Hello," the echo that came back sounded like, "Help me." I stopped walking and tried it again. This time I shouted, "Testing, testing." The echo returned as, "Testing, testing, don't go deeper." My skin went cold. I've been in these woods for over a decade, and I know every trick sound can play in a canyon. Wind, temperature changes, atmospheric pressure. They can all distort echoes, but they can't make echoes say completely different words. I pulled out my digital recorder and documented what I was hearing. When I played it back later, the recording captured my original words clearly, but the echoes were faint and distorted. You could barely make out that there was an echo at all, let alone what it was saying. Over the next week, I got 3 more similar reports. A couple on the Multnomah Falls Trail heard their own voices calling their names from a direction they'd never walked. A solo hiker on the Oneonta Gorge Trail heard himself shouting warnings about a rock slide, 15 minutes before actual rocks started falling from the cliff face above. That last one really got my attention. I hiked out to Oneonta Gorge to investigate and found fresh rockfall debris exactly where the hiker said his echo had warned him about danger. The rocks were still sharp-edged and dusty, definitely from a recent slide. But according to our geological surveys, that section of cliff had been stable for years. I started spending more time in the areas where people reported the strange echoes. I mapped out the locations on my GPS and noticed they all fell within a roughly circular area about 5 miles in diameter. The center of the circle was an old-growth section of forest that most hikers never visit because there's no maintained trail. On July 28th, I decided to hike into that central area alone. I loaded my pack with extra batteries for my recorder, my GPS unit, and enough gear for an overnight stay if needed. I also brought my climbing equipment in case I needed to access some of the more remote rock formations. The hike in took about 3 hours through thick underbrush and fallen logs. The forest felt different in there, older somehow. The trees were massive Douglas firs and western hemlocks, some of them easily 300 years old. The canopy was so thick that even at midday, it felt like twilight on the forest floor. About 2 miles in, I found the source. There was a clearing maybe 50 yards across, surrounded by jagged black rock formations that jutted up from the ground like broken teeth. The rocks were volcanic basalt, formed millions of years ago when this whole area was shaped by lava flows and geological upheaval. But these formations were different from anything I'd seen before. They were arranged in almost perfect circles, with natural archways and tunnels that seemed to go deep underground. I called out, "Hello," and listened to the echo. It came back normal at first, just a simple bounce off the rock walls. But then, about 30 seconds later, I heard my own voice call back, "Jake." I hadn't said my name. I tried it again, this time saying, "This is Jake Morrison, Oregon Parks and Recreation." The immediate echo was normal, but 30 seconds later, I heard my own voice say, "Don't trust the time loops, Jake. Check coordinates 45.6527 north, 121.9348 west." I frantically wrote down the coordinates and plugged them into my GPS. They pointed to a location about half a mile south of where I was standing. That's when my radio crackled to life. "Jake, this is Base. We've got a missing hiker report. Last seen on Eagle Creek Trail yesterday around 1,600 hours." I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Jake. I'm investigating some acoustic anomalies in Sector 7. What's the description on the missing hiker?" 23-year-old female, red backpack, hiking alone, named Sarah Chen. Family says she's an experienced hiker, but she never checked in last night. I felt my stomach drop. "Base, I'm going to check those coordinates I just sent you." "Jake, you didn't send any coordinates." I looked at my radio. I hadn't transmitted coordinates to Base, but somehow I knew exactly where to find Sarah Chen. The coordinates led me to another rock formation about half a mile away. This one was smaller, just a single natural archway about 8 feet tall. As I approached, I could hear someone calling for help. A woman's voice, definitely distressed. "Hello," I shouted. "Sarah, if you can hear me, I'm Jake Morrison with Oregon Parks. I'm here to help." The voice calling for help stopped. Then I heard my own voice echo back. "She's been here for 3 days, but she thinks it's only been 3 hours." I walked through the archway and found Sarah Chen sitting on a fallen log, looking confused but unharmed. She was wearing a red backpack and had plenty of water and food with her. When she saw me, she seemed relieved but not panicked. "Oh, thank God," she said. "I've been lost for a few hours. My GPS just keeps spinning around and showing different locations." "Sarah, what day do you think it is?" Tuesday, July 27th. I started hiking around 2 p.m. I checked my watch. It was Wednesday, July 28th, almost 4 p.m. She'd been missing for over 25 hours, but she genuinely believed she'd only been lost for a few hours. "How do you feel? Are you hungry? Thirsty?" She thought about it. "Actually, I'm not really hungry at all. I ate my lunch a while ago, but I still feel full." I helped her back to the main trail, and we hiked out together. The whole way, she kept insisting that she'd only been lost for a few hours. When we got back to my truck and I showed her the date and time on my radio, she went pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I remember everything. I was only lost for a few hours." Over the next few weeks, I kept going back to that central area. I started bringing more sophisticated recording equipment and even convinced a geology professor from Portland State University to come out and take some rock samples. Dr. Elena Vasquez was initially skeptical, but when she heard the delayed echoes herself, she became fascinated. "These basalt formations contain unusual mineral deposits," she explained after analyzing the samples. "High concentrations of magnetite and quartz, arranged in crystalline structures that could theoretically create acoustic resonance chambers. But the temporal displacement you're describing should be physically impossible." I kept detailed logs of every echo I heard. Some of them were warnings about future events, weather changes, equipment failures, even stock market fluctuations that turned out to be accurate. Others seemed to be messages from the past. I heard voices that claimed to be previous forest rangers who had worked this area decades ago. One voice, claiming to be a ranger named Tom Sullivan, who worked here in the 1970 seconds, gave me detailed information about a trail system that had been abandoned and overgrown years before I started working here. When I checked the historical records, Tom Sullivan had indeed been a ranger in this area from 1973 to 1979. He died in a climbing accident in 1980. The strangest thing was when I started receiving messages from myself. I would hear my own voice giving me information about things that hadn't happened yet. My future self warned me about a wildfire that would start near the Bonneville Dam on August 15th. I reported it to my supervisor, who thought I was having a breakdown. But on August 15th, a lightning strike started a fire exactly where my future self had predicted. I managed to get fire crews positioned ahead of time, and we contained it before it could spread to any inhabited areas. Officially, it was credited to good planning and quick response. Unofficially, I'd prevented a disaster using information from my own future. By September, I'd mapped out several locations where the time echoes occurred. They all seemed to be connected to specific geological formations, places where underground caves and passages created complex acoustic chambers. Sound waves would travel through these chambers and emerge at different times, sometimes carrying information from different temporal periods. I found 3 more missing hikers this way, people who had been lost in time loops, existing in temporal bubbles where minutes stretched into hours or days. They were all alive and unharmed, but they'd lost time, sometimes just hours, sometimes days or weeks. The strangest case was a man named David Park who'd been missing for 6 months. I found him in one of the deeper time echo zones, convinced that he'd only been hiking for about 2 hours. He hadn't aged a day. His food and water were still fresh in his pack, but according to his family and the missing persons reports, he'd vanished in February. It was now September. I've learned to navigate the time echo zones safely. I know which areas to avoid and which passages lead to stable time flows. I carry extra equipment now, backup GPS units, atomic clocks, and radio beacons that help me track temporal displacement. The government scientists who eventually came to investigate confirmed what Dr. Vasquez had suspected. The unique mineral compositions in these volcanic formations create localized temporal anomalies. Sound waves traveling through the underground chambers can emerge at different points in time, carrying information from past and future events. I still work as a forest ranger, but my job description has expanded. I'm part of a small team that monitors temporal anomalies in national parks and wilderness areas. We keep the locations classified to prevent exploitation or tourism that could be dangerous. I age slowly now. Exposure to the temporal fields has some kind of preservative effect. I look maybe 5 years older than I did when this all started, but it's been nearly 3 years. I receive regular messages from future versions of myself, sometimes decades in the future, still protecting these forests and guiding lost travelers through areas where time moves differently. The echo chamber, as we've come to call the central anomaly, has become a carefully guarded secret. Only a handful of people know what's really happening in these woods. We've managed to prevent any serious accidents, and we've rescued dozens of people who would have otherwise been lost in time. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the forest, I can hear all the echoes at once, past, present, and future voices layering over each other like a temporal symphony. My own voice among them, warning and guiding and protecting, stretched across decades of time. I've become unstuck in time, but I've learned to use that condition to help others. The forest still calls to me, but now it's calling from every moment that ever was or ever will be. And I answer, because someone has to guard the places where time itself can get lost in the echo. If you're ever hiking in the Columbia River Gorge and you hear your own voice calling from somewhere you've never been, don't follow it. Mark the location on your GPS and report it to the ranger station. Some echoes are meant to warn you away from danger, not lead you toward it. But if you do get lost, listen carefully to the voices in the rocks. One of them might be mine, trying to guide you safely home through the spaces between seconds, where lost time waits to be found. My name is Maria Crow Feather Santos, and I've been the night shift waitress at Mel's 24-hour diner in Halfway, Oregon for 12 years. My grandmother was Warm Springs, my grandfather Mexican, and I've been serving coffee to truckers on Highway 86 since I turned 19. Halfway's got maybe 350 people on a good day, scattered across this forgotten valley where the Cascade Mountains meet the high desert. Our truck stop is the only light for 50 miles in any direction after midnight. I took this job because my little brother Danny needed surgery we couldn't afford. And truckers tip good if you remember how they like their coffee and don't judge them for the pills that keep them awake. What I didn't expect was to become the keeper of the deadliest secret in eastern Oregon. What happened here isn't just some campfire story. It's documented fact, buried in police reports and coroner files that nobody wants to talk about. The thing that hunts Highway 86 has killed 17 people in the last 70 years, and until 3 months ago, I was helping it choose its victims. I grew up hearing my grandmother's stories about the old burial grounds, but I thought they were just tales to scare kids away from the highway at night. Grandmother Elena would hold my hands in her kitchen and tell me about the Roadrunner, a spirit that protected our ancestors' bones from those who showed no respect. She said the white men who built the highway in 1952 moved over 300 graves in 2 weeks, dumping the remains in unmarked holes 5 miles north without ceremony or prayer. That spirit remembers every bone they scattered, she'd whisper. Every prayer they didn't say, and it's still angry, mija. Still protecting what's left. I dismissed it as reservation superstition until I started working nights at Mel's. The diner sits exactly where the old ceremonial grounds used to be, right at the spot where Highway 86 cuts through the heart of our ancestors' resting place. Every night for 12 years, I've been serving coffee on desecrated soil, and I didn't understand why the coffee always tasted like grave dirt until it was almost too late. The first sign something was hunting came in early June. Our regular customers, the logging trucks, the long haulers, the midnight freight runs, started disappearing. Routes that used to bring 30 trucks a night were down to maybe 5. When I asked Tommy Clearwater, who hauls timber for the Warm Springs mill, he just shook his head and said, "Something's wrong with that stretch of road, Maria. The old-timers are taking the mountain routes now. The mountain routes add 3 hours and burn twice the fuel. No trucker makes that choice unless they're scared." Then I started noticing how the drivers who did stop were acting. They'd order food to go instead of sitting down. They'd keep checking their phones, asking about sunrise times, looking over their shoulders toward the dark highway. Big men with 20 years of night driving experience were acting like children afraid of the dark. The night everything changed was June 23rd, a new moon. I was alone in the diner. Our other night girl, Cheryl, had quit without notice after working just one shift. Around 11:30, I heard the rumble of a familiar Peterbilt pulling into our lot. Bill Martinez climbed out of his cab moving like an old man, even though he was only 55. Bill had been running this route for 23 years. He knew every mile marker, every truck stop, every speed trap between here and Sacramento. But that night, his hands were shaking as he walked through the door. "Maria," he said, sliding into booth 7 by the window, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have you seen anything unusual on Highway 86 lately?" I poured his usual black coffee and sat down across from him. "What kind of unusual, Bill?" He stared out at the empty highway for a long moment. "There's something out there," he said finally. "Something that follows headlights after midnight." The way he said it made my skin crawl. This wasn't trucker bravado or ghost story entertainment. Bill was genuinely terrified. "Tell me what you saw," I said. He described a tall, impossibly thin figure that could run alongside semi-trucks at highway speeds. "First time I saw it, I thought it was a reflection, or maybe another truck's lights playing tricks," he said. "But then I got a good look in my side mirror." Bill's voice dropped to a whisper. "It was keeping pace with me at 70 miles per hour, Maria. Running like it was jogging in the park. But the way it moved, like its joints were put together wrong. Like someone was puppeting a corpse." He told me the thing never seemed to get tired. It would run alongside trucks for miles, staring at the driver through the side windows with eyes that reflected like an animal's. "3 times I've seen it now," Bill said. "Each time, it gets a little closer to my cab." I wanted to dismiss it as road fatigue or stress hallucinations, but something in Bill's voice stopped me. Plus, my grandmother's warnings were echoing in my head. The roadrunner spirit, the disturbed graves, the anger that never dies. "Have you told anyone else about this?" I asked. "Tried to," Bill said. "Posted about it on the trucker forums, but the moderators deleted it. Said it was unsubstantiated rumors that could cause dangerous route changes. But I'm not the only one seeing it, Maria. Check the accident reports from the last 2 months. Trucks going off the road between here and mile marker 47, single vehicle accidents with no explanation." That hit me like a punch to the stomach. I'd heard about those accidents on the scanner we keep behind the counter. 4 trucks in 8 weeks, all on the same stretch of highway, all between midnight and 4 a.m. The drivers who survived couldn't explain what happened. The ones who didn't. To survive, well, dead men tell no tales. 2 nights later, I saw it myself. I was cleaning the coffee machine around 1:45 a.m. when I heard the distinctive whine of a Kenworth's turbo diesel approaching from the east. The truck's headlights swept across our parking lot as it passed, heading west toward the mountain pass at what looked like normal highway speed. That's when I noticed the shadow running alongside it. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe a reflection, maybe debris blowing in the wind. But as I pressed my face against the window, I realized I was looking at something that defied every law of physics I understood. It was a figure, human-shaped, but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed to stretch and contract as it moved. It was keeping perfect pace with the truck, which had to be doing at least 65 miles per hour. Not running like a human runs, but flowing like water, like something that had never learned the limitations of bone and muscle. I watched it follow the truck's taillights around the bend and disappear into the darkness. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my coffee cup. I called my manager Pete the next morning and tried to explain what I'd seen. He laughed it off, said mountain roads and night shifts play tricks on your mind. "Don't let the truckers spook you with their stories, Maria," he said. "These old highways have been generating ghost tales since they were built." But over the next week, the reports kept coming. Jake Morrison, who hauls auto parts up from Portland, said the thing had tried to climb onto his trailer while he was doing 70. "I could hear it up there," he told me, his voice hoarse from chain smoking. Scratching at the metal like it was trying to claw through to the cargo. Sarah Chen, one of the few female drivers on this route, described waking up from a microsleep to find the thing running next to her passenger window. "It was looking at me," she said. "Not just looking, studying me, like it was deciding something." I started keeping a detailed log of every sighting, every strange report, every unexplained accident. The pattern became clear within days. The encounters only happened on moonless nights, and the thing seemed drawn to the largest, loudest trucks on the highway. It showed particular interest in vehicles carrying heavy loads, timber trucks, freight haulers, anything that made a lot of noise and vibration. My grandmother had always said the spirits could feel the disturbance in the earth. Maybe this thing was drawn to vehicles that shook the ground where our ancestors' bones were scattered. That's when I made a decision that probably saved lives but definitely cost me my peace of mind. I started warning certain drivers. Not directly. I couldn't risk Pete firing me for spreading panic, but subtly. I'd mention that the road conditions were unstable on moonless nights, or suggest they might want to wait until dawn to make their run through the mountains. For weeks, I thought I was helping. The drivers I warned would usually decide to rest in our lot until sunrise or take the longer mountain routes. I felt like I was protecting people from something they couldn't understand. I was wrong. I was feeding it. The thing that hunts Highway 86 doesn't just want to scare people. It wants specific targets. Drivers who show disrespect to the sacred land they're crossing. By warning the respectful drivers, the ones who listen to local advice and heeded caution, I was filtering out everyone except the arrogant ones. The speeders, the litterers, the ones who blasted their horns at 2 a.m. because they thought the mountains belonged to them. I was helping it choose its victims. The night I realized this was July 15th, another new moon. A red Mustang came screaming down Highway 86 around 2:20 a.m., engine roaring like a wounded animal. I could hear it coming, from miles away. Whoever was driving had the accelerator floored, easily doing 90 in a 55 zone. As the car passed the diner, I saw the tall figure emerge from the tree line like smoke given form. It moved with purpose this time, not the curious stalking I'd witnessed before. This was a hunt. The thing reached the highway in 3 impossibly long strides and began chasing the Mustang. What I saw next will haunt me until I die. The creature leaped, not jumped, but leaped like gravity was optional, and landed on the car's roof with a sound like thunder. Through the diner's windows, I could see the Mustang's headlights swerving wildly as the driver fought for control. The thing on the roof was tearing at the metal with what looked like claws, peeling back the steel like it was tissue paper. The car left the road, doing at least 80, launched over the drainage ditch, and rolled 3 times before slamming into a stand of pine trees about a quarter mile past the diner. I called 911 and ran toward the crash, but I knew it was too late. When the paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, they found the driver dead in his seat. 23 years old, from Bend, cocaine in his system. 3 prior arrests for reckless driving. But here's what the coroner's report doesn't mention, what they classified as cardiac event due to trauma. The kid wasn't physically injured. The seatbelt had held, the airbag had deployed correctly, and the car's safety cage had protected him from the worst of the impact. He had died of fear. His heart had simply stopped beating from terror. That's when I knew I had to stop being a bystander and start being responsible. This wasn't just some local legend or harmless ghost story. Something was killing people on my watch, and my warnings might have been making it worse. I drove to the Warm Springs Reservation the next day and found my great-uncle Robert Crowfeather. He's 91 now, one of the last elders, who remembers the old burial grounds before the highway was built. When I told him what I'd been seeing, he didn't look surprised. "Your grandmother warned you about this," he said, "but you didn't listen until people started dying." He explained that the Roadrunner spirit wasn't evil, but it was angry. 70 years of anger, focused by the improper handling of sacred remains and fed by decades of disrespect from travelers who saw the highway as just another piece of road. "The white contractors who moved our graves didn't just relocate bodies," Robert said. "They scattered our ancestors' spirits across miles of desert. The Roadrunner is trying to gather them, to protect what's left. But it's been alone too long, and the anger has made it selective about who deserves protection and who deserves punishment." He told me the only way to calm the spirit was to perform the proper burial ceremonies that should have been done in 1952. But it would require gathering the scattered remains, some of which had been mixed into the highway's foundation itself. "The spirit won't rest until our ancestors are properly honored," Robert said. "And it won't stop hunting until every disrespectful traveler learns fear." I asked him how many people the Roadrunner had killed over the years. He pulled out a worn notebook and showed me records going back to 1,953. 17 confirmed deaths, dozens more accidents that couldn't be explained. All single-vehicle crashes, all on moonless nights, all involving drivers who had been drinking, speeding, or showing obvious disrespect for the area. "It's not random," Robert said. "The spirit chooses. It can smell the disrespect, taste the arrogance. Your warnings probably saved good people, but they also concentrated the bad ones. That realization hit me like a physical blow. By protecting respectful drivers, I had been serving up the disrespectful ones like meals on a platter. The Roadrunner had learned to trust my judgment, to wait for the drivers I didn't warn. I was an accomplice to murder. Robert and I spent the next month organizing what he called a gathering ceremony. We couldn't move the scattered bones. Too many were mixed into the highway's foundation, and others had been lost entirely. But we could call the spirits home, offer them proper prayers, and ask the Roadrunner to find peace. The ceremony took place on August 12th, on the new moon. 7 tribal elders came to Highway 86, bringing sage, sweetgrass, drums, and offerings of tobacco and cornmeal. They set up a temporary altar right in our diner's parking lot, at the spot where the old ceremonial grounds had been. As the sun set behind the Cascade Peaks, I stood at the diner's window and watched them begin the prayers. The drums started slow and quiet, like a heartbeat. The sage smoke drifted across the highway, carried by the desert wind. That's when I saw it, the Roadrunner spirit standing at the highway's edge. But this time, it looked different. Still impossibly tall and thin, but somehow more human. Less like a nightmare and more like a person who had been carrying too much weight for too long. It watched the ceremony with what looked like curiosity, then slowly walked closer. The elders never stopped their prayers, even as the spirit circled their altar. I could see it clearly now. Ancient, tired, and so very alone. It had been protecting our ancestors' scattered bones for 70 years, growing more angry and isolated with each passing decade. The ceremony lasted until dawn. As the first rays of sunlight touched the mountains, the Roadrunner's spirit looked directly at me through the diner window. For just a moment, I saw not a monster, but a guardian who had been carrying an impossible burden. Then it faded into the morning light. The attacks stopped that day. Not completely. Drivers who speed through the area or dump trash still report being followed. But the deadly encounters ended. The spirit still watches Highway 86, but now it seems more interested in warning than punishing. I'm still working at Mel's Diner, but my role has changed completely. The Tribal Council worked with the state to install educational signs along Highway 86, explaining the cultural significance of the area and asking travelers to drive respectfully through sacred land. Our diner has become an unofficial information center, with displays about local tribal history and the importance of respecting Native American burial sites. Most drivers appreciate the education. The smart ones slow down, observe the speed limit, and treat the area with appropriate reverence. But every few months, someone decides the rules don't apply to them. Those are the ones who still get followed. The difference is that now I know the Roadrunner isn't just hunting randomly. It's protecting something precious. The memory of our ancestors and the sanctity of sacred ground that was desecrated in the name of progress. I keep detailed records of every sighting for researchers who study highway folklore and unexplained phenomena. But more importantly, I've learned that some monsters exist for necessary reasons. The Roadrunner spirit isn't evil. It's a guardian that was created by injustice and sustained by disrespect. The next time you're driving through remote areas where old highways cut through land with long histories, remember that not all the dangers are natural ones. Some roads carry the weight of old crimes, old angers, old responsibilities that someone has to bear. And if you ever find yourself on Highway 86 near Halfway, Oregon, especially on a moonless night, remember that you're driving through a cemetery. The graves may not be marked, but the dead are still there, still watching, still being protected by something that loved them enough to spend 70 years seeking justice. The coffee's always hot at Mel's Diner, and I'm always happy to tell travelers about the real history of the area. Just remember that this isn't entertainment, it's documented fact, written in blood on 70 years of accident reports. Some stories are true. This is one of them. And the Roadrunner is still out there, making sure respectful travelers stay safe and disrespectful ones learn fear. That's not a threat, it's just the way things are on Highway 86, where the dead demand respect and the living learn to give it.